day, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for responding to our invitation to participate in the traditional meeting, during which we'll take stock of the outcomes achieved in the foreign policy last year. I'll try to briefly present them in my welcoming remarks. A new polycentric international system was evolving. It continued in parallel with growing global competition, rivalry, including among values and development models. Against this backdrop, Russia was striving to contribute to international and regional stability, sustainable global governance. We were guided by the new version of the foreign policy concept of the Russian Federation adopted in February last year, which reflects the adjusted vision of our priorities in the evolving world, and we were guided by the presidential decree of 7th of May 2012 on the measures to implement the Russian Federation foreign policy. These documents are designed to create favorable conditions for social and economic development of the country, to get economy into the innovative track and improving the quality and living standard of our citizens. Russia was promoting a unifying positive agenda in the international relations in order to get closer to the settlement of modern fundamental problems. That is the approach Russia stuck to during its G20 presidency and during its presidency in G8, when we assumed presidency in this forum. Its summit will take place on the 4th and 5th of June in Sochi. Our priorities include improving efficiency in such areas as fight against drugs, fight against terrorism and extremism, health security, global management of natural and man-made risks, and, of course, contributing to the resolution of regional conflicts. Last year, progress was achieved in the field of peaceful resolution of some of the most dangerous crises, together with partners from Russia, United States, People's Republic of China, and many other states contributed actively to mobilizing efforts of the international community on Syrian and Iranian issues. We are satisfied with the fact that common sense prevailed based on the logic of the world and basic principles of the international law. We are consistently calling for building our efforts on this very basis, contrary to unilateral efforts, including the attempts to use the force bypassing the UN Security Council and Charter of the UN. Together with the implementation of a program for the demilitarization of chemical weapons in Syria, Russia is doing everything at stake to settle the Syrian crisis. In accordance with the Russian-American initiative, tomorrow in the Swiss city of Montreal, an international conference will start at 6 to create an inclusive inter-Syrian international national dialogue based on the Geneva Communique of the 30th of June 2012. It's up to the Syrians to define the future of their country, and attempts to get involved in social engineering and impose recipes of political global order are counterproductive and will lead to solid peace and national accord. By the way, the recent example involving the developments in South Sudan, the country which was created due to the activity of a number of international stakeholders, attests to that. Another very important problem is the surging wave of extremism and terrorism. The majority of eminent politicians agree that the gravest threat to Syria is posed by the terrorist group associated with Al-Qaeda. That is why the measures to neutralize it should become among the priorities of the Geneva II conference. That is also the call of the leaders made at the G8 summit in June this year. I believe that you would ask questions regarding the Geneva II conference. That's why now I'm not going to go into details. Yesterday, the countdown for the Geneva Action Plan began. around the settlement of the Iranian nuclear program based on the stepwise approach proposed by Russia. Together with partners from P5+1 and Iran, we will continue searching for the final mutually acceptable solution that would provide for the inalienable right of Iran for peaceful nuclear energy under the control of IAEA and security of all the countries of the region, including Israel. We understand that the progress in all the mentioned above areas of foreign policy are not guaranteed. Up ahead are dangerous crossroads, so I will have to make a choice between partnership and cooperation, long-term strategic goals, and up-to-the-minute opportunistic considerations. As regards Russia, we will continue to implement mutually acceptable approaches, providing for equal and indivisible security of all the states. That is our key priority with regards to the situation into the Euro-Atlantic region. The OSCE and Russia-NATO decisions cannot remain on paper. They should be implemented. Decisions that provide for the creation of the space of peace, security, and stability in the Euro-Atlantic region based on mutual trust, transparency, predictability, and indivisibility of security. When no state can ensure its security at the expense of the security of others. The symbolic events which will be marked this year, including the 100th anniversary of the beginning of the First World War and 75th anniversary of the beginning of the Second World War, remind us of the catastrophic consequences of the belief in one's own exceptionalism and zero-sum geopolitical games. Russia was consistently striving to strengthen strategic partnership with the European Union. We believe that in the longer term, it is in our common interests to create the single economic and humanitarian space from Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. This initiative was put forth by President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. The considerations about systemic problems in the partnership between Russia and the European Union are unsubstantiated. Of course, we are going to be guided by the principles of equality and mutual respect. We believe that these principles should be implemented in relations between all the states, including the countries participating in the Eastern Partnership. Respect of the right to independently define one's future is of fundamental importance in the modern world, and no one should be imposed on the remedies from the outside. It is in line with the realities of the 21st century that dividing lines are watered down and not accentuated, and integrational processes are implemented rather than isolation. That is why we're developing an integration project according to which the Eurasian Economic Union will be created in 2015. Our integration structures, as we have mentioned on many occasions, are open for many partners, including the participants of the free trade area of the Commonwealth of Independent States. We would like to wish success to Ukraine during its presidency in the CIS this year, and we support the program formulated by the Ukrainian leadership during its presidency in the Commonwealth. Russia, in turn, starting from September last year, is presiding over the CSTO. And in line with our program, we are striving to improve efficiency of this organization, including in the field of responding to common threats and challenges, including those coming from the territory of Afghanistan, and take into account the so-called factor of 2014. Productive results of the joint work between Russia and the United States in a number of areas of global policy attest to the great potential of bilateral cooperation. Unfortunately, the cooperation will not expand with the help of irritators, including the missile defense systems and attempts to exercise extraterritorial influence of American legislation on Russian companies. We are ready to pursue interaction at that level of intensity that will be suitable for Washington, based on non-interference and mutual respect and equality. Dynamic development in all the areas was pursued in the course of Russian-Chinese relations based on comprehensive strategic partnership. The cooperation between Russia and Beijing on key pressing issues of the global world, including within the framework of the UN, BRICS, and SCO, became an important factor ensuring the balanced nature of global relations. An indispensable aspect of the foreign policy of Russia is the efforts to get integrated into the Asia-Pacific region, tapping its potential to develop Siberia and Far East, which is our national priority for the 21st century as a whole. Ensuring peaceful development, stability, and security is the purpose of the Russian initiative adopted by the Eastern Cypriot and supported by China, and devoted to the development of framework principles for new regional architecture. We developed our strategic partnership with India, Vietnam. New momentum was given to the relations with the ASEAN countries, multifaceted cooperation with Japan, the Republic of Korea, and many other states of the region, including within various multilateral mechanisms in the Asia-Pacific region. Mutually beneficial relations continued with the states of Latin America, Africa, and their integration, associations, and regional structures. Our priorities include the protection of the rights of Russian citizens and compatriots living abroad, promoting the interests of Russian business community, expanding international humanitarian and cultural cooperation, deepening intercivilizational and interreligious dialogue, information campaign and awareness-raising campaign of our work. We developed cooperation with the Federal Assembly structures of civil society, including business and community councils to the President of the Russian Federation. We developed relations with the public chamber and non-governmental organizations. We will be guided by all the tools of diplomacy, classic parliamentary diplomacy, public diplomacy, economic diplomacy, and we will take into account the role of media in the modern world. That is why it would be relevant to speak about the information diplomacy. Anyways, it's better than to talk about information wars. Meeting with the ambassadors accredited to Russia, President Putin emphasized that Russia will develop a well-thought, responsible, predictable approach and contribute to finding joint answers to collective challenges and into ensuring stable global development. A few days left before the beginning of the Winter Olympics and Paralympic Games in Sochi. We will give fresh impetus to the international sports cooperation, and as any Olympic Games will contribute to the revitalization and improvement of the atmosphere in the world. I'm ready to answer your questions. Thank you very much. The first question will be asked by Russia 24, Nikolai Lavrov. Sergey Viktorovich, it's been known that UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon revoked the invitation to Iran to the Syria conference. What is Russia's attitude towards it? How can it impact the efficiency of the meeting in general, which was devised in such a complex manner? Well, you know, of course it is a mistake, and I've mentioned it on many occasions, but it won't be a catastrophe. Anyways, it is a one-day event which will take place on the 22nd January, tomorrow, with the participation of around 40 foreign ministers of various states, including the remote regions such as Latin America, East Asia. And of course, despite the ceremonial nature of this event, the fact that Iran is not present in the list of 40 states cannot but raise questions. Take into account the results of our joint work with Iran, and John Kerry, as many others, recognized publicly that Iran is to play an important role in finding mutually acceptable ways to settle this Syrian crisis. We have always been calling for the fact, and it's also the basis of the Russian initiative, for the fact that all the foreign stakeholders that could have an impact on the situation on the ground should participate at the initial stage of this conference. Well, generally speaking, it is our common cause to involve Iran to this process in the same way as many other countries of the region. All the countries are invited, whereas it turns out that the invitation to Iran has been withdrawn. Well, you know about the response of the opposition to the Ban Ki-moon's announcement that he's going to invite Iran. National Coalition put forth an ultimatum. Either the invitation is withdrawn, or in 6 hours they'll announce that they will not participate in the conference. And meaning that the situation is not very healthy. But let me remind you that the structures created by foreign stakeholders and sponsors consist of dozens of immigrants. I met most of them, and most of them represent personalities interested in bringing peace to the country, as we hope. That is why comprehensive settlement is needed. But let me remind you that the national coalition, from the very beginning, was guided by the principle of ousting the current regime, and its external sponsors were encouraging it. The principle of the regime overthrowing is not at the basis of the Russian-American initiative. According to our initiative, the conference should be convened in order to initiate a direct dialogue between the Syrian sides, in order to fully implement the Geneva Communique of the 30th of June 2012. That's it. There is no attempt to foresee the results of the Geneva Communique implementation. It only states that all the issues should be addressed by the Syrians themselves based on the general mutual accord between the government and the opposition. Many countries, as I mentioned, were conniving and were encouraging the national coalition in order to put forth preliminary conditions, including the ousting of the regime. In various statements by the so-called Group of Friends of Syria, which was protecting this coalition, including the recent statement adopted in December, it is directly put forth that the ousting of the regime is the primary goal of all the efforts that are being undertaken.
So when the Secretary General said that he was forced to withdraw the invitation to Iran because Iran does not share the principles of settlement envisaged in the Geneva Communique, this was, as I believe, it's a very sly phrase, because the Geneva Communique states what I has just said. There should be a general consent between the opposition and the government. And it was those who insist that the Geneva Communique and its implementation should lead to the regime change. It was them who insisted on the withdrawal of invitation. But this is not good faith interpretation of the Geneva Communique of 2012. So it results that those who engaged in the ill faith interpretations are now represented at large in the Geneva conference, while Iran, who doesn't want the regime to be changed, who is quite frank about that, you know its position, I will not comment it right away, because we are talking about the invitation situation. Iran is being demanded to consent to the preconditions imposed by the opposition with the support of the whole range of supporters. This is not very graceful, as I see it. You see, if we take a criterion of the settlement principle stated in the Geneva Communique, then several dozens of countries should not be invited there at all, because all of them support the regime change. This is how I see the situation. And it results that it turns out that everything turns up-down, because we also insist on not interpret the Geneva Communique in different ways. That means that we also do not satisfy the demands of those who insist on inviting Iran. This is absurd. And it is also important to put it into a perspective. It is a mostly ceremonial meeting, one-day meeting. The ministers will come, will call for the Syrians to come to an agreement, probably with some nuances, and they will go away, while the Syrians will stay there. They will engage in a specific dialogue, which will not be easy. Probably it will take some rounds to complete it, but the symbolism is still very important. It's not a secret that the Syrian crisis has bared the contradictions, the discrepancies, the differences in the region that were accumulated in the region for many years, including the differences within the Islamic world. We have been constantly warning against against this schism in the Islamic world. But there are those who wish to implement this schism, to split the Islamic world, and to support it. And in this context, the withdrawal of invitation to Iran will not help to support the efforts of the Islamic world in fighting terrorism. And if we are talking about who takes sides with whom, who approves the conditions, let's take the Taliban movement. Do the Taliban movement accept the resolutions of the Security Council? No, but the United Nations and the United States engaged in negotiations with them to find some solutions. We need pragmatism, and the ideological approaches, unilateral considerations will not lead to anywhere, but there is no disaster. We will come to the Geneva conference, though it will be held in Montreux, but still its name is Geneva too, and we will promote our line, we will pursue our line to start the direct dialogue without preconditions between Syrian parties, and I believe it is in our mutual interest to make the inter-Syrian dialogue an inclusive one, because the national coalition is just a part of Syrian opposition. And it was from this coalition that Syrian National Board, Syrian National Council opted out from. But besides that coalition, there are oppositionary forces that are acting inside Syria. National Coordinating Committee, National Front for Changes, Syrian Democratic Assembly, Kurd organizations, and we should engage in the thinking over how to make this dialogue be in line with those criteria that are approved by the UN Security Council, who has called for ensure the participations of the entire range of the Syrian society in this dialogue. This is what we should strive to. And speaking about principles, the sponsors of the national coalitions at its outset recognized it the only representative of the Syrian people. And how does it go in line with the Geneva Communique, which states that the future of the Syria should be determined by the government and opposition, basing on their consent and agreement. And while the coalition is recognized as a representative of the Syrian people, then it means that those who recognize it do not recognize the Geneva Communique. So I very lament that. Ria Novosti, please. Good afternoon. My question is about the negotiations about visa regime with the European Union. How long will it take to complete them, especially taking into account that our Justice Minister stated that the agreement will not be signed in the January summit in Brussels? When can we expect the facilitation, the simplification of the visa regime and the cancellation of visas? Well, actually, this is a very protracted topic. I have commented on it very many times. Speaking briefly, the agreement on the future facilitating of the visa regime, which includes the entire range of categories, journalists, youth exchange participants, and so on. This agreement is already drafted, so there is a need of a political will on the part of Brussels, on the part of the European Union, because the countries, the state members, if I understand them right, are already ready to this step. The reasons why the process is so slow are well known. There is an intention to associate the future steps on the visa facilitation with the problems that are not related to this issue, probably to trade something out of the Russian Federation, and there is a desire to be guided by political pragmatism. But in the minds of several EU members, it is associated with the attempts to not to give away to Russia to this facilitation system before the Eastern Partnership partners. This is a secret to no one, and we are quite relaxed about it because, first of all, this is in the interests of European and our citizens, and not for some political dividends. The same considerations are an obstacle to the final agreements of the cancellation of visas. You know that we have agreed on the list of mutual steps on 4 blocks, including border securities, border controls, protection of the movement documents. And on each of those blocks, steps were drafted, were implemented. We exchanged visits, inspection visits. We were examining how the situation is going on in our countries. According to our estimations, these steps are already implemented and all the verified criteria are there. But the political considerations still exist there. They want the situation with human rights to be improved, but we ask them how, and we do not hear any concrete answers. So we advocate the implementation of all those commitments that the European countries took on when the OSCE was created, at the time when it was the meeting on Europe security in the Helsinki, according to the Helsinki Final Act, which will soon mark its 40th anniversary. It was about the free movement, and our Western partners were insisting on that. Social countries were hesitating, and now the situation is just the opposite. Now we believe that the ideology will be in the background and the dividing lines will be watered down, will be erased. It is in the interests of all citizens of the European continent. Thank you. The question from our Chinese colleagues, please. Good afternoon, Sergey Viktorovich, Central Television of China. Thank you for your high estimate of the relations between our countries. My question will not have any bearing on that. I have one question only. Everybody knows that the actions and the speeches of the Japanese Prime Minister brings about a lot of concerns from the neighboring countries. I mean the demonstrative visit of the Japanese leader of the Yasuguni Shrine and his New Year speech about the planned changes to the constitution that is now constraining military capabilities of that country. What will be your comments on that account? Thank you very much. We have been already commented the visit of the Yasuguni Shrine by the Prime Minister of Japan, and we believe that this step will not help to normalize the relations between the countries of the region. We have repeatedly emphasized the need to be guided by the United Nations Charter in all international relations, especially and including the affairs of the Asia and Pacific regions and South and East Asia. And the Charter proclaimed the results of the Second World War, and to put them into doubt is to directly contradict the United Nations Charter, which was ratified by all the members of the United Nations. We are also interested in the reduction of the tensions that still persist in the Southeast Asia. that it be minimized, and we are also putting effort in that, participating in the Eastern Asian Summit. At the last Eastern Asian Summit, which was held in Brunei, Russia supported the framework initiative containing the principle that ensure the parameters of new regional security. That initiative was supported, was approved by all participants of the Eastern Asian Summits. The Asian countries, United States, Australia, New Zealand, India, Japan, and I believe and we hope that the decision to start the development of such principles will help greatly. We understand that the Japanese is an economic power. It is our neighbor. It is our partner on multifaceted cooperation. We want to cooperate with it closely. Our trade and mutual investments are growing, and this is the way that is needed by both states. And it is in our interest that the relations between all countries are built up constructively and will not be overshadowed by any crisis. There are problems in the region, including territorial disputes, but we advocate the position that those territorial disputes be solved in a peaceful manner without internationalization and directly between the countries involved. We will support any actions directed at it. Russia Today, please. Sergey Viktorovich, I would like to continue the Iran topic. Regarding the nuclear program of Iran, yesterday the first phase is coming into force of the settlement of this program. What shall we expect further? Because this first phase is for half a year only. Many experts say that the next rounds of the negotiations will be much harder, and it will be much harder to come to some comprehensive agreement. What obstacles can be there in the way, and what Russia expects of the future settlement? The agreement, which started to be implemented yesterday, was about the implementation of Iran, the steps that were agreed in the document, freezing its nuclear program, reducing several segments of its nuclear program, and in response, the United States and the European Union will ease unilateral sanctions that were imposed besides those decisions made at the United Nations Security Council. You know our attitude towards the unilateral sanctions. They are harmful for constructive deliberations, but we are welcoming that agreements. We were participating in that agreements, and we were putting forward the very concept which was a base for that agreement, which recognized the right of Iran for using nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, including the uranium enrichment under the strict control of the IAEA. And within all those rights that are there for the non-nuclear states parties to the nuclear proliferation ban treaty. This was the first stage. The second stage of the negotiations will start in several weeks. These will be the consultations within the second round, and their aim is to come to an agreement regarding the settlement of all the problems related to Iranian nuclear program. The documents that was approved by on November 24th in Geneva, the 5+1 group, together with the Iranian foreign minister, have come to an agreement that the final package should include the agreed level of the Iranian nuclear program, including the uranium enrichment level for the peaceful purposes. And actually, It is a very ambitious task, but it has been formulated and it was set as a goal. So we need to make every effort to concentrate those talks on the agreeing mutually acceptable points. And on the part of the 5+1 group, their commitment is when Iran will satisfy all the requirements stated by the IAEA, well, all the issues will be solved. Their commitment is to lift all the sanctions, including the Security Council sanctions. It is a very hard work. I cannot predict how much it will take to be completed, but we will be firm in trying to make it as soon as possible and trying to avoid any artificial obstacles to those talks. As I understand, other members of the 5+1 group and Iran itself also stick to this position, which is reason to be optimistic. Bloomberg Agency, please. Good afternoon, Sergey Viktorovich. I have two questions regarding Syria. The first one is about the military campaign against Islamic forces of the Syrian Free Army. What is your estimate of that campaign? Does it hold any hopes? Earlier you said that opposition should help the regime of Bashar Assad to fight terrorism. And the second question, recent news emerged that Russia is beefing up its military deliveries to Syria. I didn't quite understand the first question. Who is opposing Free Syrian Army? No, I was talking that there is a military campaign on the way against the Islamist groups, and the Free Syrian Army is engaged in those combat operations. To what extent it is positive?
Regarding the supplies of armaments, I'm not going to reiterate our position. We have commented on it on many occasions. We are not supplying anything that is forbidden to Syria, and we are not supplying anything that could destabilize the situation there. Regarding the situation around the armed opposition, I believe it is a bit more complex than the picture you have presented right now. As far as I understand, I believe the part of the Free Syrian Army and part of many other groupings have become the composition of the Islamic Front, which consists of 10 or 20 smaller groupings. And a number of these groupings do not differ a lot from Jabhat al-Nusra and in many other extremist and terrorist structures. The gravest and atrocious threat on the ground is the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, which is active not only in the Syrian Arab Republic but also in many other countries, including and particularly in Iraq. And the Islamic Front is fighting against this very structure. Jabhat al-Nusra, which is also on the list of terrorist organizations created by many countries, but as we can judge by the media news, it supports the Islamic Front, the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, and sometimes it is against it. By the way, militants are coming from one structure into the other, depending on the conditions of their service, so to say, there. And the army has been very weakened recently, and we're concerned about that because all the structures, the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant and Jabhat al-Nusra, are fighting against terrorism because they are pursuing the same very ideology, but they are not fighting against terrorism as a phenomenon. They are fighting against each other in order to gain control on the ground. They are fighting for power, frankly speaking. You have said that the Free Syrian Army should have helped the government in its fight against terrorism, but it's not how it was put forth in Lochern, for example, at the G8 summit. The British Premier David Cameron, the president in the G8 at that time, proposed to state in the Geneva communique to reflect the call to combine efforts to remove extremism and terrorism on the ground. All leaders supported this call and believe that this call is relevant as never before. Thank you very much. Geneva communique provides for the transitional governing body in Syria. What do you think about this body? What will it be composed of? What will be the timeline? Who should it report to? And will it be accompanied by any international assistance? Thank you. Well, you know, it is not up to me to decide it. It is up to the Syrians to make a decision on this issue. And according to the Geneva communique, and according to our common position, this transitional body, this transitional authority would be useful to achieve agreement on all the issues regarding the future public order and state order in Syria. It will be useful for the adoption of laws which will be agreed upon, constitutional reforms if needed, elections. And the key for the understanding of the approaches among participants of the Geneva communique is the statement that the agreements on the establishment of this transitional body should be reached based on the mutual consent on both sides, on the government and the opposition. We cannot predetermine the details of this arrangement. We want peace to prevail in Syria. We want Syria to be sovereign, free from terrorism. We want to provide for the equality of ethnic and confessional groups in Syria. These are the principles the international community is promoting. And actually, they are universal. They can be applicable to any crisis situation. And how these principles will be implemented, what the deadline of this transitional authority be, what personalities will be involved in the process, is up to the Syrians to agree upon. That is the purpose of the Russian and American initiative. And we will hope that after tomorrow's ceremonial opening, these negotiations will start. Please introduce yourself. Boris Anzov, Bulgaria. First of all, let me note what is written here. It is the words of the Bulgarian Han Kuprat, who asked their sons before he died not to disintegrate, because if they start to disintegrate, they will be enslaved. That's what happened. Don't you have anybody to present this flag in Bulgaria, this scarf? Well, actually, it was a present given to me, but I was going to ask about the Bulgaria and the Balkans region. First of all, let me personally congratulate you on the success you achieved as a diplomat. Regarding our country, the countries we represent, there is nothing to hide here. We are fraternal peoples. And regarding what Russia is doing to bring closer our countries, 5 years ago was told that Serbia has a Nokia cell phone. With every year, it is becoming smaller and smaller. We were disintegrated by force from the outside. What do you think about that? And let me quote one Hungarian joke that our Central and Southern European countries are below the butt of a frog. What would be your comments on that? And by the way, last year, there was a referendum in Bulgaria regarding the construction of the nuclear power plant. What is your attitude towards it? Because at first it was said that Russia is going to build it, then Americans were supposed to build it, to construct it. What do you think about it? Well, I couldn't understand the question, actually. Well, thank you. Speaking about the situation at the Balkans region, it is not gratifying at all because quite a lot of outstanding issues remain, and it is very, very difficult to settle those issues, including the Kosovo issue, including the situation around Bosnia and Herzegovina. And on the whole, I agree that the disintegration of Yugoslavia was a very ambiguous event, which was predetermined by the mistakes made by the countries involved. And of course, it was under the influence of the external factors, which had an impact on the situation. Anyways, this event contradicted the Latin spirit of the Helsinki Final Act, the key principle of the OSCE. But in general, when some countries of the OSCE bombarded the country, which is also a member of the OSCE, contradicts all possible and well-known principles of the organization stipulated by the document approved of at the highest possible level. One cannot rewrite the history, but we will do everything at stake to bring stability to the Balkans region. We are actively contributing to it in various formats, including the steering committee for Bosnia and Herzegovina. We are ready to support and back the processes initiated with this support of the European Union between Belgrade and Pristina. The solution can be viable only if it is in the interests of both sides. We cannot impose anything, we cannot forbid anything to anyone. Serbs and many other peoples present at the Balkans region should shape and determine their own interests by themselves, and they should be guided by these interests when decisions are made with regards to the future of this region. We will support and respect the choice of each of these peoples. And of course, international regulatory framework should be implemented and should be complied with, coordinated by the international community. As you've put it correctly, we have friendly, long-standing relations with Bulgaria. We have a common history of our fight for independence. We would like to thank the Bulgarian people for the memory it keeps about our joint battle. The memorials created and open to the Russian Bulgarian soldiers. We are open to the constructive partnership. We've had many plans to be implemented not only in the nuclear power energy. These are the plans regarding the oil pipeline construction and many other energy projects. Right now we are pursuing the plan to construct the South Stream, which is one of our priorities. Of course, we cannot impose anything, and we hope that the Bulgarian government is guided by the interests of its own country, implementing all these issues. That's all I can say. Estonian TV. Regarding the frog, I'm sorry, I'm not that strong in the jokes like that. That's why I cannot comment on it. Estonian TV. Estonian TV, Anton Alexeyev. Dear Mr. Minister, I would like to ask you about our bilateral border agreement, which has suffered a lot, which has been coordinated for a while by our countries and cannot be signed. Is there any progress here? Will this agreement be signed and ratified this year? And I have the second question regarding the report on the human rights situation published by the European Union not long ago. The question is regarding Estonia and the Baltic states and the area of application of the Russian language. Can any agreement be reached between Russia and Estonia, for example, so that Russia could contribute to the preservation of the Russian language, for example, by creating and maintaining a number of elite secondary schools in Estonia? What would be your attitude to it? How can this problem be solved? Thank you. Regarding the bilateral border agreement on the delimitation of border and maritime borders, land and maritime borders, the text has been agreed upon, and right now we're agreeing on the place and date to sign this agreement. With regards to the rights of national and language minorities, not only in the Baltic states, but in any other state of Europe and other continents, we are pursuing a very consistent and clear position. We want all the countries to implement the international commitments that they assumed. Regarding Estonia and Latvia, it means that they need to respond to the recommendations presented by the international structures, including the OSCE, the Council of Europe, and the UN Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. A number of concrete, straightforward recommendations have been given to Estonia and Latvia in order to consistently implement it, in order to consistently liquidate such a disgraceful phenomenon as stateless persons. This is the only thing we ask from our neighbors, to implement these recommendations. Unfortunately, they're not willing. They hesitate to implement these recommendations, and it is of concern to us the fact that the European Union is trying to justify their position, ignoring the recommendations of the international structures to which Estonia and Latvia and other EU member states are members. The European Union is covering for this approach, stating that the human rights issues within the European Union is addressed at a satisfying level, and they ask us not to interfere in it. But it is unacceptable for us, because rights are the same everywhere in all the international organizations. It cannot be so that some European countries have primary grade human rights and the other have secondary grade rights. We are all the OSCE member states. We all are to implement a number of universally agreed, signed political commitments. And there is the Convention of the European Union which is to be implemented, and all member states of the European Union are members and parties to this convention. With regards to the Russian language, I agree with you. In parallel with the work carried out directly with the leadership of these countries, in order to convince our neighbors not to make decisions which are infringing on the rights of the Russian-speaking minorities and Russian-speaking population in Estonia and Latvia, we adopted the project called Russian School Abroad, which will be implemented soon. We are going to agree with Baltic states and many other our neighbors and many other states where our compatriots reside, in order to create at our expense Russian schools where children will be educated based on our standards. We would like to implement it all as soon as possible, but you understand that not all depends on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. Thank you. Interfax Agency, the floor is yours. Sergey Viktorovich, let me go back to the Northeastern Asia issue. It is clear that the six-party talks on the nuclear problem of the DPRK are frozen right now. Are there any positive signals that the dialogue could revitalize on this issue? How will the bilateral dialogue between Russia and DPRK will be developed? Are there any high-level contacts planned this year? Thank you. Regarding the six-party talks, we believe that there can be no alternative to this process. The the goals remain the same. Denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, with the basis for negotiations remaining the same, which is the statement made by the 6 states, including the DPRK, made in September 2005. It includes all the steps that are to be taken by Pyongyang and reciprocal steps undertaken in response to its cooperation on the dismantling of military nuclear program. These reciprocal steps imply the development of the peaceful energy in the DPRK and many other financial perks. Right now, the DPRK and its leadership are sending a positive signal regarding the readiness to resume negotiations without any preconditions. A number of other participants of the 6-party talks believe that the DPRK is to undertake steps that would convince the rest that they are serious about their intentions. So they want unilateral actions from DPRK before the negotiations resume. We believe that it is important to find the way out of this situation, which is, let me reiterate that, the basis, the foundation made in September 2005. We went together with our Chinese partners, which are very important in this process. We are trying to come to the middle ground, to come to the consensus necessary to resume these negotiations, so that we should be worried not about who loses face or who preserves its face, but about the security of this region, which is very important. By the way, within the framework of the 6-party talks, when they were at their active stage, a number of working groups were created. Russia is at the head of the working group for the development of principles for peace and security in the Northeast Asia. What is meant was, when the progress was achieved in the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, this working group would be highly in demand. It would develop the parameters for the future world order in the Northeast Asia for the longer term. I do not rule out this opportunity, the opportunity to use this working group to initiate the discussion that would contribute to confidence building. Maybe when these consultations in this format will be convened, the process could be initiated. These are the ideas which we share with our partners from the 6-party talks, counting on their revitalization as soon as possible.
Of course, it is unacceptable for us to the emergence of new nuclear military powers. This is the position that is shared by Russia, by China, and the participants of 6-party negotiations. We are trying to explain our North Korean friends and neighbors the benefits that they will have from the solution of the issues that we committed to 8 years ago, 8.5 years ago. It includes the creation of a strong system with the security guarantees for the People Koreans Democratic Republics. How to move forward to that goal? We are trying to find the ways. Let me add just one point. We have condemned the actions of the North Korea on nuclear tests, on missile tests, which violate the decisions of the Security Council, and we call them for restraint in our everyday context. At the same time, we are condemning the attempts to exploit this situation in order to disproportionately build up military potential in the region on the pretext of North Korean threats. The steps taken by other countries, including the United States, referring to the threats from the North Korea, are not in line with the real military potential of the North Korea, and we would not like for a new pretext to emerge to build military muscles, including the deployment of strategic bombers, air carriers groups near our borders, and including the forced establishment of the component of global missile defense system of the United States. And regarding the bilateral relations, our relations with the North Korea are developing. They are quite intense, quite tightly scheduled. We are willing to implement three-party projects with the participations of both Koreas and the Russian Federation, like railway projects, energy projects, electric energy projects. And we are also maintaining good contacts, intense ones, between our embassies. And we expect that among the guests of the Olympic Games, the representatives of North Korea also will be there. I represent Cairo Shinmin, a newspaper. My name is Ishida. Let me ask the question through interpreter. Last year, the leaders of both countries have met 4 times. A new format, 2+2 format, has also been launched, and energy cooperation is also promoted quite successfully. We can know that the level achieved in the relations is unprecedentedly high. What are Russian plans to promote bilateral relations for this year? And can this new dynamics and new era of the bilateral relations lead to the solution of political problems, those who haven't been solved for a long time between two countries? And what is the most important to be made to solve those problems? The answer is yes. We are interested in the future build-up of our ties with Japan. We see great potential in this cooperation. It already proves its efficiency. Virtually all automotive industry leaders of Japan have already opened their production in Russia. The energy companies are cooperating closely in Sakhalin, in other projects, and humanitarian links are also evolving. Russian Days in Japan, Russian Cultural Days of Japan are yearly held in Japan. The political contacts between different institutions, between different ministries, including Foreign Ministry, are also there. And as you noted, the summit dialogue is also underway. Last year, 4 ways, four times the meetings were held. Mr. Putin accepted the invitation to visit your country, and your Prime Minister visited our country as well. And I'm sure that we will agree on the acceptable timeline for the visit of our president, and I believe that in the near future the contacts between our leaders will continue. We set great value to them because they allow us to find the future guidelines for the future actions on all levels of executive authority. There is no doubt that the expansion of the cooperation, the promotion of multifaceted partnership in all areas, be it economy, culture, personal contacts, and especially in foreign policy, will contribute to embark on the solution of peaceful agreement issue. This problem, we inherited it. It's not an easy one. It is related to many sensitive points on both sides, and the solution should meet the interests both of Russia and Japan, and that the peoples of our nations accept that solution. It is a very difficult task, but the first steps should be taken. We have resumed The dialogue on the peace agreement, the preliminary consultations, were held in Moscow in August. In some weeks, Tokyo will host the first round of those consultations. And upon the consent of both parties, the historical aspects of this problem will be considered during this first round. And actually, this is the most important aspect. I already touched upon the recognition of the outcomes of the Second World War that were proclaimed in the United Nations Charter for the solution of this problem. And the solution should be acceptable for both people, the people of Russia and Japan, and we stand ready to be patient on this way. Please, BBC. Mr. Lavrov, 2 questions about the Ukraine. To what extent the Ukrainian problem is an irritant in the relations between Moscow and your European colleagues? And the second question, it is frequently said that the outcome of this confrontation could be the splitted Ukraine. Is this prospect realistic one? I would not indulge in provocational discussions of the split of the Ukraine. We are doing everything what it takes to avoid it, to stabilize the situation. And we will continue on this path. Ukraine is our neighbor, is our partner, is our friend and brother. And one should not be ambiguous here. We are convinced that the domestic problems of any state should be solved through the dialogue based on constitutional and legal provisions. I do not know who takes offense from us for the events in the Ukraine, but we would prefer that several European colleagues would not be so outright, would not be so unceremonial about the Ukrainian events. We do not approve of them taking part in the Maidan events, in anti-governmental protests, especially the representatives of the country who do not have diplomatic relations with the Ukraine. Of course, you are following the events there on the TV. You know how it started. In the government buildings, militants persisted for several weeks. Can it happen in any of the countries of the European Union? No, it wouldn't be tolerated. And now the fires, the combats, Molotov cocktails, improvised explosive devices, it's a horror. It violates all the European behavior standards, and I hope that the leaders of the opposition will do something about it, because some of their calls show that the situation is going under control. We have the information that the situation is incentivized from abroad, but it turns out that those incentives do not take into account the interests of the opposition itself. They try to bring about violence. I do not know if something similar happens in the European countries. Nobody doubts the need for firm measures to prevent violence, to eliminate violence and protests, while now the countries from abroad are calling for making conclusions out of that. Our colleagues at the Kiev session of the OSCE Minister Council, our colleagues tried to persuade us to listen to the people's voice of the Ukraine. If not, the chaos will ensue in the Ukraine. We are not interested in that chaos. Our interests lie in the stability in the Ukraine. There are a lot of links between us, economic, cultural, spiritual links. We do not want to pour oil into the fire that somebody trying to burn there. What are the reasons of those protests? The government made a decision not to sign and not to initial at the moment documents with the European Union. And what ensued? You know that the European Union also witnesses several protests. For example, in Greece, there were protests for coming out of the European Union. In other countries, Eurosceptics are forming political parties. What stand should they take against them? Where is the freedom of expression? Our colleagues from Estonia were asking us, while their neighbor Latvia introduced euro without any referendum, while the survey of the public opinion, only 8% of the population were advocating for that, while the others were against that. So what is to be done about it? Take to the streets and set fire to the governmental buildings. So we are ready to discuss with the European Union about the measures that will eliminate the policies of setting dividing lines. We are trying to overcome the policies which says either you are with us or you are against us. Several European politicians are promoting such approach. When the Ukrainians, when the Ukrainians and their Prime Minister Nikolai Azarov said that they propose to hold tri-party consultations, Russia, Ukraine, and the European Union, President Putin said that we stand ready for that, but the European Union was categorically against that, and it is still against that. Why? Nobody explains that. We will hold a summit with the European Union in the end of January, and it would be very interesting to listen to their reasons, to their reasoning. So we are very concerned about the developments in the Ukraine, and we call for all the parties to solve the emerged problems through dialogue only, based on the constitution and legal provisions of the Ukraine. Turkish agency, please. Nadolu. Good afternoon, Sergey Viktorovich. My question is about Syria. Yesterday, in the evening, some media published photos proving criminal military crimes of Assad, and the reports of the investigations were also published. What do you think about that? And the second question, is it a sufficient proof to prove the military crimes of Assad and the forces loyal to him? You know, I didn't see those photos, but I saw previous reports. I already said in my introductory remarks that information policies are the best for information wars, and these are also parts of the information war. One has to be aware that military crimes are committed in this conflict on both sides. And what conclusions can we make out of those reports, of those briefings that were held for the last week in Geneva by the United Nations Commissary on the Human Rights, on humanitarian issues? The most atrocious crimes are committed by jihadists. But the main principle of responsibility for military crimes, it wasn't abolished by anyone. It is proclaimed in Geneva Communique, in the United Nations resolutions. One has to separate real facts from lies that is widely spread, including by respected TV channels. There are a lot of examples. I will not give the names of the channels, not to offend anyone. There are a lot of examples when the channels with good reputation, regional channels, showed the atrocities near Damascus, and then it turned out that it were atrocities committed 10 years ago in Iraq, and there are a lot of such examples. Everything depends on the source and the motivation of the source. 90% of the references to the regime atrocities came from the Syrian Observatory of Human Rights, which is a small flat populated by 2 people. So this is the observatory that spread sources, that spread news about what happens in Syria. I do not say that crimes are not committed in Syria. They are, but they should be documented, and we should not take this aspect as a most acute and relevant one. And we should not demand that until justice prevails, we will not talk to the regime, while the opposition forces have come out with such demands on the preliminary stage. The first task now, the first task at hand is to stop the violence, and then in the process of stabilization of the national reconciliation, the necessary steps should be done. There is relevant global experience, but the facts should be verified. A lot of lies are spread around this topic, actually.
Елена Черненко, пожалуйста.
Kommersant newspaper, Yelena Chernenko, please. Thank you very much. Sergey Viktorovich, a year ago, a law was adopted that banned Americans from adopting Russian children. Before that, you expressed your concerns about the negative impact that Russia states should have had with regards to the monitoring the fate of the adopted children. Do you think that the adoption of this law is justified, and what impact did it have on the arrangements between the United States and Russia on monitoring of the children that had been adopted? Thank you. Unfortunately, no positive developments have been seen and witnessed after the law was adopted. We touched upon this topic with the Department of State, and on a case-by-case basis, we asked for the access to children who, according to the American media, were suffering or turned out to be in a very difficult situation. We are asking the Department of State, without this agreement, but based on the relevant conventions and other regulatory framework, grant access to them. And not before, not during this agreement, and not right now, we cannot get access to the locations we are trying to get access to. Let's say Montana, the rancher for kids, so-called. It is a closed territory for us, and it remains so. And strange things are happening now, even according to the American justice system, because the American courts made decisions that demanding the hosts of this rancho to re-register. Now they are registered as a religious organization, which they are not. And against this pretext, they are denying of access. That's why court claimed they get registered as social structure in order to get access to them. But as of now, we haven't got this access. That is why this topic will remain on the table. But let me draw your attention to the fact that we are not the only ones who are not satisfied with the system in place in the United States with regards to the adopted children and their protection. A number of countries dissolved the denounce the agreements with the United States similar to the one we had with the United States due to the reasons that these agreements were not implemented properly and in good faith. We discussed it with our American partners, and we will continue to do so during our permanent dialogue on the human rights, that the problem of the adopted children in the United States, not only about the children adopted from Russia or from other states, even with regards to the children adopted by the American families, American children, causes lots of doubts. There is a number of reports with regards to that. I'm not going to reiterate it right now, but let me state that the progress has not been achieved, and the problem that has been quoted by our American partners, according to which the legislation in the states prevails in this area, remains. It hasn't been settled, and it is to be discussed so that we could achieve real access to children, so that we could understand the state of affairs and the situation around these children. Thank you very much. The Ukrainian Information Agency, the floor is yours. Sergey Viktorovich, let me continue the Ukrainian issue. You've mentioned that you're working towards the stabilization of the situation in Ukraine. I said that we are calling for the stabilization of the situation. Okay, that's true. So, against the backdrop of the confrontations where dozens of people from both sides suffered, including dozens of journalists and Russian journalists, what has happened today, what are the circumstances for Russia to become a mediator in the settlement of the political crisis in the Ukraine? Is Russia ready to consider the situation from that angle? Thank you very much. The circumstances could be the only one if we are asked to do so. But as I can see that no such an assistance is required. We have direct contacts between the president, between the opposition. A separate structure has been formed in order to develop these contacts. I believe the first meeting even has taken place. We deplore and condemn any violence, and I hope that everybody understands that provocations which can be watched from the screens are unacceptable. Well, the same as happened in December when the police officers were, I believe, staying there. They were freezing and they were hit by the excavator. How can it be associated with the aspiration to get integrated into Europe? And the fact that what's happening right now with the baseball clubs, with the violence, of course, everybody wants a response from the law enforcement forces. And if journalists suffer, it's even better. I believe that everybody understands what's happening in reality right now. And I don't think that it has something to do with the promotion of the European values. Thanks God that the leaders of the opposition start to realize that they start to distance themselves from these provocations. But let me reiterate that we call upon everybody to address these issues based on dialogue and in the legal framework. Thank you. The colleague, although you were very active yesterday, but one cannot but notice you. Yesterday, the technical group from Dagestan put forth threats against the Winter Olympics in Sochi. Do you think that these threats are instigated from the abroad? Well, you know, terrorism has no nationality. Terrorism is an international phenomenon. It takes an international dimension, and it is well known. It is all well known to the security services which are in contact between each other. The president has mentioned on many occasions that will ensure the security at the Olympic Games. There is a separate headquarters, including representatives of all the states, whose athletes will participate in the games, and I'm convinced that measures that are taken are sufficient enough. Enough. Thank you. A group of journalists from Azerbaijan. Please, just one of you, just take the floor. Thank you very much. TV and radio of Azerbaijan. Mr. Minister, this year we'll see the 25th anniversary from the date when the Bishkek Protocol was signed between the Azerbaijan and Armenia, and according to which the war was stopped. For 20 years, Azerbaijanis cannot get into the motherland of its culture, Nagorno-Karabakh. Are there any measures to be taken to address the conflict? And we know that the Armenian embassy of the Russian Federation, there is the mission of the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic in place. Is it legal, and doesn't it contradict the Russian position on this issue? I don't have this information, actually. I haven't heard about that. From time to time, they say that on the territory of various embassies and in contradiction to the Vienna Convention, apartments are rented or restaurants have been opened up. I don't know about that. I'm proceeding. I believe that the Vienna Convention should be implemented by everybody. Regarding the second part of your question, I believe that both sides should come to an agreement, and the meeting between President Aliyev Sargsyan, which took place in Vienna in November, is encouraging. Take into account that it's been the first such a meeting over the last 2 years, and what we can get from the contacts with Armenian and Azerbaijani friends. The presidents were satisfied on the whole by their talks. They agreed to pursue these talks both at the level of foreign ministers. Bear in mind the development of their personal dialogue. Russia, together with the United States and France, as co-chairman of the OSCE Minsk group, is trying to give assistance to the development of such a dialogue. Certain progress has been achieved by the co-chairmen, which are on the negotiation table, which are presented to the OSCE. These achievements are not rejected by anyone, but they require additional efforts in order to come to principled agreements with respect to the ways to address this regional problem. We will contribute to this process, but let me reiterate once again that the most important is that there is the accord on the both sides on the principles which will be the basis for this process. We encourage both sides, together with the Americans and the French. We are ready to put forth various ideas for the consideration of Baku and Yerevan, but it is up to them to have the final say. Thank you very much. Now I would give the floor to the representative of the newspaper Moskovsky Komsomolis. Sergey Viktorovich, what are the prospects for the resumption of diplomatic relations between Russia and Georgia? Can we expect Russia to abolish visas for the nationals of this country? Thank you. The prospects depend not on us. Georgia is the one who decided to sever diplomatic relations. That is why I believe it would be more logical to address this question to Tbilisi. Regarding the visa-free regime, I have commented on that, and President Putin expressed his ideas on this account. We are for facilitating contacts between people, but of course it could be considered against the backdrop of the relations existing between our countries, including the facts that you have just mentioned. The lack of diplomatic relations constrains a number of other areas for cooperation between our countries. But everything boils down not to the formalities, not to the lack of diplomatic relations. Everything boils down to the fact that we cannot change the reality that has evolved after Saakashvili initiated this war. That is why the attempts to precondition the promotion of our political contacts by the denial of Russia to recognize the reality that is on the ground these items are counterproductive and they will not bear any fruit. Unfortunately, despite all the signs, positive signs in trade and transport communication and people-to-people contacts, the number of visas given to the Georgian nationals to visit Russia grew by 40% compared to the indicators of 2012. And irrespective of all these improvements, and irrespective of the fact that we value the aspiration of our Georgian neighbors to contribute to the security during the Winter Olympic Games, very often we stumble against this problem, the problem that results in the fact that Georgia refuses to recognize the reality that has emerged, and it will hinder our relations compared to what could have been achieved. We are open for the closest contacts in the various fields, take into account the reality that is existing right now, and it cannot be changed. I believe a couple more questions. The colleague with a green folder, green and white folder to be precise. Actually, you have a mic in your armchair. You see what technologies we have acquired. Well, I represent the German information agency BBR. Mr. Minister, I have a question regarding the Russian image on the international arena. A number of our colleagues wrote after Khodorkovsky was released, and amnesty adopted by the State Duma, that these steps are taken in order to improve Russian image right before the Olympic Games. Has the image of Russia improved? What do you think? You meet regularly with the representatives of foreign states and you can tell. Or is there any need at all to improve Russian image in the world? And one more question regarding Germany. Yet another conference will take place in Munich in February on the security issues. Could you share with us your expectations from this conference? What would be particularly important or particularly interesting at this conference? If you could do that, that would be great. And if you allow me, one more small and catchy issue. What have you done to the potatoes presented by John Kerry? Well, regarding the Russian image, well, I believe that every adequate person would like to feel well, to look nice. That's natural. Regarding Russia, and your question whether its image has improved or not, I don't think it is up to me or up to us to answer this question. It is up to you, actually, to answer that question. You asked about my impressions from the contacts with my colleagues. Throughout all these years when I'm working as a minister, I haven't felt any fluctuations in the attitude of my Western, Latin American, African and Asian partners and partners from the CIS countries over the last 2 years, when it has become fashionable to say that the Russian image is being distorted or it is dilapidating. I haven't felt any changes in the sentiments during the contacts with all my European or foreign partners. Yes, indeed, usually at the end of negotiations they say that, well, as I have to say, as we agreed in Brussels, we call upon you to develop the civil society. I answer, yes, we've heard your call, and then at the press conference they will tell for sure that we've touched upon the issue of the civil society. Let it be. That's a good thing. We're interested in developing the civil society and in improving the role of the civil society in Russia and European countries. We want the civil society to be heard. We're undertaking steps in that direction. And we hope that our European friends will address the issues that they are facing. The problem of the stateless persons is the one I have raised today. And connivance at the attempts to glorify Nazism, that is yet another fact that is well known. And if it is left unattended, the results could be very detrimental. So it is up to you to judge what image we have. Let me give you just one example that occurred to me 2.5 years ago, or even 3 years ago, when the Syrian crisis was only beginning. There was a harsh stance according to which Russia was to change its position, that Russia was on the wrong side of history, that Russia lost Arab world, that Russia lost Middle East. There is no one who is saying like that. Maybe it attests to the fact that our image has changed to a certain extent, or maybe the understanding and the position of other states have changed, positions of those who said these things towards us. So it's up to you to judge. Regarding the Munich conference and my expectations, well, I expect discussions, talks with the political scientists representing the whole world. This is a nice forum with a good reputation involving the participation of interesting interlocutors and interesting participants, and that's why we count that the same will hold true of the upcoming conference. Now about potatoes. Well, to be frank, I agreed. And I sent this potato to Cuban, to one of our farmer, and they will try to make experiments with it.
Так, прошу вас.
The floor is yours.
Information agency Prensa Latina from Cuba. Sergey Viktorovich, Havana is about to hold CELAC summit. What are the prospects? Will you present your delegations? It is a good format for the partnership. What can you say about the of constant dialogue with CELAC? Thank you very much. As I have already mentioned in my introductory remarks, we maintain close cooperation not only with Latin American countries bilaterally, but with the integration associations as well from Latin America and Caribbean. And CELAC is the first organization that unites all those states, and unlike Mercosur, UNASUR, it is the universal institution which brings together all the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. We believe that it is a very promising process that will enable the harmonization of the integrational processes in Latin America in an entire range of directions. And such a universal forum, there is much need for it inside the American countries, and the foreign partners of Latin American countries are probably also interested in work with them together, both bilaterally and with regional institutions and with CELAC as an entity. On May this year, Russia has expanded its CELAC three-party format. We held very useful consultations, and we agreed on coming to an agreement on the parameters of the constant dialogue with this institution, and the oncoming summit will take its decision on that, and we are ready to make it a practice. We are also preparing the memorandum on cooperation with the Central American integration systems. We have good relations with Mercosur, including within our customs union, and a lot has been done, and a lot useful developments has been done lately in our relations with Latin America. We are entering the procedure of visa-free regime with Paraguay. This is the 11th country of Latin America which we will have such an agreement with, and I believe that in the foreseeable future all select territory can be visa-free zone for the Russians. Colleagues, please understand me right that you have only a couple of questions because the minister has its own matters to attend to. The woman with the journal, Ludmila Nikishina. My question is about the cross-year Russia and Great Britain, which is announced for the 2014. Thank you, Sergey Viktorovich, for a new term, information diplomacy, that you have invented. The town of Serpukhov, which is near Moscow, saw such an action on the part of journalists in the direction of the development of such diplomacy. They found some historical documents that this year will mark 100th anniversary of organization of the children's football games, and the first trainers for those children teams were the Englishmen who were working at the time at textile production. I would like to ask you to support the idea of some journalists around Moscow to organize a tournament for the children. Several countries have already agreed on that, but we couldn't reach the British consulate. I sent a letter to them, but no answer was received. So I would like you to provide some assistance for such public diplomacy to organize that tournament. Thank you. I have seen that news and I thought about it right away. Please be seated. And it is heartening that that our work has led to the beginning of the functioning of the public diplomacy. Do you have your letter with you? Yes, we will try to help you. It is that we are sometimes also not allowed to the British consulate, but we will try it. Well, the last question, please, colleagues. The girl over there. Please introduce yourself. Natalia Suvorova, Kommersant FM. Could you please comment on the recent history about the expulsion of the American journalists? His version differs from the official version of the MFA. He says that first his visa was approved and then he was told that his presence is undesirable at the Russian territory. Could you please comment on that, since the U.S. Ambassador Michael McFaul was saying that he was working on the derogation of that decision? Do you want me to tell you that the MFA's version is not the right one, while the version of the Mr. Sutter is the right one? Actually, he was here for some days on illegal grounds, and since he has been working for several years here, he would have known that he had to take some steps to resume his status. He had some months to do that, but he waited until his visa expired, and somehow there was a lot of ado about that, as if some political intrigue is involved. The crimes of violating immigration laws, along with the tax crimes, are seen in the United States as the most serious ones, as the most grave ones. And the visa expiration leads to detention and deportation. Let's see the statistics and let's look at how the Americans deal with that. There is nothing extraordinary about that. But if something happens here in Russia, the facts are distorted. Much ado is raised about that, while the practices of other countries are seen as sovereign ones. Let's just respect one another, let's just respect ourselves, and let the laws be enforced. Nobody can stay in a country without a visa. That's it. Okay, let's have some more. Not to offend. Oh, you have already asked your question. Yes, please. Belgrade newspaper. I have two questions. You said that one of the priorities is the South Stream. You know that Brussels is exercising pressure on several countries through which this gas pipeline will pass. And now the negotiations have started between Moscow and Brussels. And what are your forecasts? When can we expect this pressure to cease? And the other question is about your activities. I believe that when we received our foreign minister, Mr. Lukarin, you had more close ties with him than with our current minister, and you met him much more time than with the current one. Will you visit Serbia this year, or your counterpart will come to Russia, or there are no such plans at all? Regarding our relations with Minister Markish, I wouldn't say that our relations are less intense and less trusted than that with his predecessor, with Luka Miranovic. We had a close cooperation in the period when we were preparing the decision on the presidency of Serbia together with Switzerland in OSCE for 2014-2015, and we did a lot of preparatory work. After that, Mr. Vukirinic put his nomination to the presidency of the assembly. Now, yes, I have the invitation to visit Belgrade, and I will use it. We are interested in enriching our dialogue, including in parliamentary area, including the dialogue between multilateral organizations. There was a round of consultations attended by the Eurocommissar, Mr. Oettinger. This topic has been discussed, the topic of the South Stream has been discussed, and we came to a conclusion that we should find a solution which will not contradict intergovernmental agreements signed between the Russian government and the governments of Serbia and European countries that would like to take part in that project. Let's take two more. France Press, please. Am I right?
Сергей Викторович, это агентство France Press.
France Press Agency. Could you please comment on the situation on the detention of the Russian fishing boat in Senegal? Why the situation cannot be settled for such a long time, and what role Greenpeace is playing here? We are commenting on that in detail regularly. Now the situation has been, I believe, normalized, more normalized than several time ago, and the ship owner used our support and support of some of our foreign countries, foreign partners who have special relations with Senegal authorities, is trying to solve this issue. The crew do not present any complaints. The constraints that were imposed are now lifted, and we believe that everything will be solved in the nearest future. As for the Greenpeace, you see, this topic is widely discussed, and the Greenpeace members do not conceal that they had a hand in it, but actually this is their role. In many other cases, such a sacred cause as the environment protection is used to achieve some political goals and to make a business out of it. It is deplorable, and we hope that non-governmental organizations will strive to live up to those ideals that the civil society and public associations are based on. Please. Monsome Information Agency. I would like to ask you, you have mentioned that the next year will see the 75th anniversary of the Second World War. No, the 100th anniversary of the First World War and 75th anniversary of the beginning of the Second World War. Next year, our countries are commemorating the 75th anniversary of the Kholkhin victory. Will the Russian government commemorate this event? You also have mentioned the educational programs, Russian schools abroad. Will Mongolia participate in that program? I know that Russian school is functioning in Mongolia at the embassy. It is a success, but not so many people are let in. Of course, we will commemorate the victory at Kholkhin, and we are willing to coordinate the events with our Mongolian friends. The Russian Schools Abroad project implies the opening of other schools, and it is in our interest to open such a school in Mongolia. Last question, please. You have just been answered that. The last question, please, unfortunately. Polish radio, Matthias Jastrzemski. My question, I have two questions. The first one is, what are your expectations for the European Union and Russian summit, January this year? I believe very serious questions will be discussed there. And the second one, we were very pleased in Poland with the fact that Mr. Kerry gave you potatoes, and we at once thought about Poland, and the Polish journalist at once thought about you. It's not Zhitne. But it is in the package. I can see that it is in the package. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. As for our prospects in the EU-Russia summit, we see European Union as a strategic partner. It is a strategic partner of ours. It is our main trade and investment partner. And the European Union is also willing to work in Russian markets, to invest in the Russian Federation. There are a lot of examples. The examples are growing. So it is not up to us. It is. We do not have any doubts about the development of the cooperation. The cooperation should be developed. There was a question on the part of the European Union whether we see European Union as a competitor or as a partner, but actually the partnership does not exclude competitiveness. And competitiveness will always be there in the framework of the market economy. And I fully concur with the chairman of the European Parliament, Mr. Schulz, when he was advocating the expansion of a dialogue with Russia and the elaboration of a common policy towards Russia. Of course, it is much more easier for us to negotiate with the European Union when it has one voice, but we wouldn't like the policy towards us to be determined on the principle of the common ground, because sometimes there is a situation when several countries are holding all the others to the ransom with regards to a solution of some issue with Russia. That was witnessed during our visa discussion with the European Union. European Union has proposed to enlarge our discussion at this summit. Our partners in Brussels advocated the change of the format of the summit to concentrate it on some informal discussion and to hold a working lunch afterwards. We agreed with that. If it is convenient for our partners, the specialized ministers and Eurocommissars, the part when the European commissars and our ministers reported to the European Union heads and our president about their work, was excluded. So we are ready to take on any other format. It is in our interests to understand more thoroughly some things regarding Eastern Partnership, regarding the obstacles why the European Union isn't willing to engage in the harmonization processes in the Western and Eastern. The initiative of the President Putin to create a common cultural and humanitarian space from the Atlantic to the Pacific is very much in line with the ideas voiced by the Mr. Barroso and Mr. Rompuy when they were advocating the single market in this space. And why, at the peak of the European events, European Commission rejected the idea of three-party negotiations? We have to understand it more. We do not make a point that such integration processes are incompatible. First of all, in our integration entities, we should raise our competitiveness, and then we should be more open in the discussion with the European Union. Then our positions will be more strengthened, will be more solid. These positions will be strengthened as our work in the WTO intensifies, and then we will be able to discuss trade and economic issues with the European Union on a more level ground. And we would like to understand what are the European Union plans in facilitation and in the eventual cancellation of the visas.
There are many other issues. Energy sector is a pillar of our cooperation. A lot has been achieved here, but certain difficulties that pop up that have to do with the Southern Stream, which was named today, they are all boiling down to the third energy package. And we want the third energy package as the implementation of the sovereign right of the European Union to introduce rules on its territories is not applied retrospectively. That's it. We do not cast doubts with the respect to the rights of the European Union, but when these rules are applied retroactively towards the agreements concluded before, to what had been achieved before, is representing the violation of the commitments existing between Russia and the European Union to the protection of investments and not to worsen the existing conditions. This is a simple question. If it is not politicized, everything would be addressed in an easy and pragmatic way. But there are certain attempts to politicize various fields, including the energy sector, in our relations with the European Union. Well, we are not lamenting this fact. That's how it is. So the European Union is the great association which is trying to streamline the positions of a number of stakeholders, which is very difficult, but we will continue our work in all these areas. But of course, an open and frank, trustworthy dialogue, not involving just bringing up claims, but involving the reasons behind various approaches of the European Union is very important for us, because European Union is a strategic partner for us. Let me reiterate that. Dear colleagues, thanks a lot. I need to leave right now and to attend the next meeting. We will meet on many occasions in the future in various formats. That is why, once again, Happy New Year. Those who celebrate New Year based on other calendars, I would like to congratulate you on the upcoming New Year on the Eastern calendar. Thank you very much. I took your letter.